My name is Anne. I've always been the dependable one in my family. The one who answers the phone when someone needs assistance and who always steps in no matter what. It has been this way for as long as I can remember. Perhaps it's because I grew up in a home where everything revolved around family. We didn't have much, just enough to keep the lights turned on and food on the table. But we had each other. My parents worked hard. My mother doing 2 jobs and my father working long hours in construction. And then there was me, the youngest of 4 children, always striving to find serenity in a family that was as loud and chaotic as it was loving. I learned how to fix things from an early age, whether it was helping my brothers with their homework or listening to my sister moan about a boy who shattered her heart. They turned to me. I did not mind. In fact, I enjoyed it. I liked being the one people could rely on to make things better. As I grew older, I carried that with me. I went to college, became a guidance counselor, and spent my days listening to other people's issues and attempting to assist them in figuring out their next steps. I loved it. I thought I was really excellent at it. I believed that assisting others was my purpose. Then my sister, Chloe, lost her husband. Jet was only 12 years old at the time, a little child forced to grow up far too quickly, and Chloe was doing her best, but losing her husband destroyed her. She needed someone to step in, as did Jet, so I did. I didn't think twice about it. He wanted stability, and I could provide it to him. It started out small, bringing him up from soccer practice, helping him with his homework, and making sure he had what he needed when Chloe couldn't, but it grew with time. I attended every game, school performance, and parent-teacher conference. He phoned me when he was sad, and he trusted me when he needed to chat. I felt I was helping him and doing the right thing, but trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to construct, but just one instant, one decision could destroy it utterly. I didn't notice it then, or perhaps I didn't want to. I didn't want to admit that the lines were blurring, that what I believed was love and support turned out to be something quite different. This is the narrative of how I shattered that trust, how I crossed boundaries I shouldn't have, and how I injured someone I care about the most. It's not a story I'm proud to share, but it's the truth, and if revealing it makes even one person pause and think before making the same mistakes I did, it could be worthwhile. Jet adored his mother, Chloe. She was his universe and anchor. She was the type of parent who made every moment count, often encouraging him during soccer games. She stayed up late to assist him with tasks and sat with him during thunderstorms since she knew he disliked the sound of rain beating against the windows. They had a rare and unbreakable bond. But life isn't about bonds, right? Chloe's life ended abruptly. She was driving home late at night after working a double shift at the hospital. She was tired. It had been a hard day, and now there was the drunk driver. He ran a red light, and Chloe was gone in a second. Jet was just 12 years old. I will never forget that call. It was almost late, and the phone rang loudly enough to surprise me. When I responded, it was Curtis Clark, a family friend who had been approached by the authorities. His voice was quivering, and all he could say was, "She did not make it." My heart fell, and all I could think about was Jet. What would I tell him? How can you tell a youngster that the person who was his entire universe isn't coming back? When I arrived at the house, Jet was sitting on the couch, knees drawn up to his chest, staring at the front entrance as if he were waiting for her to walk through. He did not cry at first. He simply sat there, mute and forlorn. When I knelt in front of him and informed him she had left, the light in his eyes went out. He didn't say anything. He simply sank into my arms, sobbing so hard that I feared he'd break. From that point forward, I became everything to Jet. His father had been absent for years, having departed when Jet was only a toddler. Chloe had raised him alone, and now that she was gone, there was no one else. I stepped in because someone needed to. He needed me, and I would not let him down. It began with the basics, ensuring he had food, clothing, and a safe place to sleep, but it quickly expanded to include more. Jet was in grief and didn't know how to deal with it. He stopped talking to his friends, his grades dropped, and he became a shell of the boy he once was. He was angry, too angry at the world, angry at the motorist who abducted his mother, and possibly upset at her for abandoning him, just like his father. He finally spoke up one night, around 6 months after Chloe died. I was assisting him with his arithmetic assignment when he suddenly blurted, "It's not fair. She was everything I had." His voice cracked, and he glanced at me, tears in his eyes. Why did she need to leave? What did I do wrong? Hearing those words broke me. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that sometimes the world is just cruel. But I knew those words wouldn't be enough, so I did the only thing I could. I wrapped my arms around him and said, "I'm here. You're not alone. I'm here." From that day forward, I did everything I could to fill the void Chloe had left. Behind, I went to every soccer game, helped him with every school project, and made sure he knew he was loved. But I wasn't Chloe. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't be her, and maybe that's where the cracks started. Jet leaned on me for everything. He called me for every little thing, from choosing what to wear for picture day to asking for help with problems at school. He even started skipping outings with his friends just to spend more time with me. "You're the only person I can talk to, Aunt Meline," he said to me once, his voice heavy with gratitude and sadness. "You actually listen." Hearing those words made me feel like I was doing the right thing, like I was giving him something no one else could. But not everyone saw it that way. Curtis, my cousin, and one of the few family members who still kept in touch, started expressing concern that "You're doing an amazing job," he said one day over coffee, his tone cautious, "but Jet needs to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. He's leaning on you for everything, and that's not healthy for either of you." At the time, I brushed him off. I told myself Curtis didn't understand what Jet had been through, and he didn't see how much Jet needed me, but looking back now, I realize he was right. I wasn't just helping Jet. I was holding on to him too tightly, trying to be everything for him because I didn't know how to let go. And in doing so, I blurred lines that should never have been blurred. I didn't see it then, but the cracks were already forming. Cracks in Jet's ability to grow, cracks in my judgment, cracks in a bond that, while built on love, was slowly becoming something it never should have been. Yet, as he was changing, I started noticing it when he turned 15. His voice deepened, his frame broadened, and the quiet, shy boy I'd spent years protecting was slowly becoming someone new, someone I didn't fully recognize. It should have made me proud, and in a way it did, but it also terrified me. He was growing up, pulling away from the safe little world we'd built together, and I didn't know where that would leave me. At first, it was subtle. He started spending more time in his room, shutting the door when he used to leave it open. He laughed at my jokes, less brushed off my offers to help with his homework, and spent hours scrolling on his phone instead of talking to me like he used to. I told myself it was normal, that all teenagers go through phases like this, but it didn't stop the ache in my chest every time he chose solitude over my company. Then he met Scarlett Larson. She was a classmate of his, bright, outgoing, and effortlessly charming in that way only 15-year-old girls can be. Jet couldn't stop talking about her. Every other sentence was about something funny Scarlett had said in class, how good she was at soccer. And for the first time in years, he seemed genuinely happy, and I should have been happy for him, but instead, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach every time her name came up. Feels like I'm losing him. I confided in Curtis one afternoon when he stopped by for coffee. "He doesn't need me anymore," Curtis said. He gave me a long, thoughtful look before responding, "Meline, that's a good thing. Jet's growing up. He's supposed to need you less." I didn't say it out loud, but I didn't agree. I couldn't imagine a version of my life where Jet didn't need me. I didn't know who I was without him. The first time it happened, it was an accident, or at least that's what I told myself. Jet had stayed up late working on a project for school, and I found him asleep on the couch, papers scattered around him. I went to drape a blanket over him like I'd done 100 times before, but this time I hesitated. His shirt had ridden up slightly, revealing a sliver of his lower back. My hand froze, lingering for just a moment too long, and something inside me shifted. I felt a rush of guilt so strong it made my chest tighten, but I ignored it, tucked him in, and went to bed. It was little moments like that, small, fleeting instances that seemed harmless at the time but added up to something much bigger. A touch on his shoulder that lingered a beat too long, a compliment that felt a little too personal. I convinced myself it was innocent, that I was just being affectionate, but deep down I knew better. The first time we crossed the line, it was in the kitchen. Jet had just come home from soccer practice, sweaty and exhausted but still grinning from ear to ear. He was talking about how Scarlett had scored the winning goal, his excitement filling the room, and I couldn't stop staring at him. His face was flushed, his hair damp, and there was something about the way he looked at me, So open, so trusting, that made my heart race. I don't know what came over me. One minute we were laughing, and the next I was leaning in. I kissed him. It was quick, barely more than a brush of my lips against his, but it was enough. He froze, his eyes wide with shock, and for a moment I thought he was going to pull away, but he didn't. He moved steadily to me with his eyes almost piercing through mine. "What are we doing?" he asked, and before I could utter a word, he held my waist and drew close to him. His succulent lips pressed towards mine before we could realize what was happening. I was lying flat on the floor with Jet on top of me. He unblocked his belt with so much haste while I peeled my pants off my waist. I wasn't thinking anymore, and neither was Jet. Caressed my left thigh and moved his fingers slowly to my waist while kissing and licking my neck. I moaned so loud and held him tightly. It was my greatest experience with Jet. Yes, it was wrong. I was wrong. I should have stopped us, but I couldn't resist him at that moment. After that, everything changed. We told ourselves it wasn't wrong, that it didn't hurt anyone if no one knew, but the truth was it was wrong. I knew it, and I think Jet did too. We convinced ourselves and normalized the experience. It felt good until I heard the conversation between Jet and his best friend Bryson. They'd met at school a few months after our affair. Around this time, Jet started confiding in Bryson. Bryson Blackwell was the kind of kid who was wise. Beyond his years, always offering advice that seemed far too mature for a 16-year-old. Jet trusted him maybe even more than he trusted me, and I could tell it was starting to weigh on him. One evening, I overheard them talking in his room. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the thin walls of the house. "I don't know what to do," Jet said, his voice low and filled with frustration. "It's like I can't stop, but I don't even know if I want it anymore." "What do you mean?" Bryson asked. It's too much. I feel as if I no longer know who I am. She's constantly there, doing everything. I can't breathe." There was a long pause before Bryson responded. "You need to tell her. Tell her you need space. This isn't healthy, Jet. You know that, right?" "I can't," Jet said, his voice cracking. "I don't want to hurt her. She's all I've got." Bryson sighed. "You have to for both of your sakes." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. I realized then that I wasn't just hurting myself. I was hurting Jet too, but I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to let go of the only thing that made me feel whole. Things had been strained between Jet and me for a while, but I refused to see it. He was pulling away more and more, spending hours locked in his room or out with Bryson and Scarlett. The little moments we used to share, laughing over a movie, cooking together, were fewer and farther between. I told myself it was just a phase, that he'd come back to me like he always did, but deep down I could feel the distance growing, and it terrified me. One night I was scrolling through photos on my phone, pictures of Jet from when he was younger, back when everything felt simpler. I came across one from his 13th birthday, him grinning at the camera with cake smeared on his face. I remember thinking about how much had changed, how much I'd given to him, and how much I needed him to stay close. I didn't realize then how selfish that need had become a Jet, and he was spending more time with Scarlett, and it was driving me crazy. He'd come home from school and barely say 2 words to me before heading out to meet her. One night he mentioned she'd invited him to a party over the weekend. I could hear the excitement in his voice, but all I felt was panic. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Parties at your age can get out of hand." And she gave me a look I'd never seen before, somewhere between annoyance and disappointment. "It's just a party. Aunt Meline Scarlett's parents are going to be there. It's not a big deal, but what if he cut me off? What if I can't have a life of my own? You don't have to worry about me. Aunt Meline, I'm not a kid anymore." I froze. He'd never spoken to me like that before, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. "I'm just trying to look out for you," I said quietly. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know, but it feels like I don't know. I have to go see you in the morning." The conversation ended there, but it stayed with me that night. I couldn't sleep. His words kept replaying in my head. Can't I have a life of my own? I knew he was right. I'd been holding on too tightly, afraid that if I let him go, he'd slip away completely. The tension came to a head a few days later. Jet had just come back from hanging out with Bryson, and I could tell something was off. He barely looked at me as he walked past, heading straight for his room. I followed him, knocking lightly on the door before pushing it open. "Hey," I said softly. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Hurt, anger, maybe even fear. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but steady. My stomach dropped. "Okay," I said, sitting down in the chair across from him. "What's going on?" He took a deep breath, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind, but then he spoke, and his words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't even know how to tell you this, but I felt like I couldn't say no. To you for a long time," he said, his voice shaking. "It's like I don't have a choice, and it's killing me." I stared at him, stunned. "I don't understand." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I've been trying to figure it out for months why I feel this way, why I keep going along with things I don't want to do. And I think it's because I don't want to disappoint you, but I can't do this anymore." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that everything we'd done had been mutual, consensual, but deep down I knew he was right. I crossed lines that never should have been crossed, and now I was watching the fallout in real time. After he left the room, I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. How had I let it get this far? How had I convinced myself that what I was doing was okay? The weight of it all was unbearable, and I knew I couldn't carry it alone anymore. The next day I called Rebecca Pina, my best friend since college. She'd always been the one person I could count on to tell me the truth, no matter how hard it was to hear. When I told her everything, she didn't hold back. "You need to take a hard look at yourself, Meline," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You can't repair this unless you own up to it. All of it." "I know," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I just don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it overnight," she said. "But the first step is letting Jet go. He needs space to figure out who he is without you, and you need to figure out who you are without him." Her words were like a slap to the face, but she was right. I hated myself for making the poor guy into someone he didn't want to be. Jet informed me a few days later that he needed some space. He stated he wasn't angry, but just wanted time to ponder and digest things. Hearing those words devastated me, but I knew they were important. As much as it hurt, I had to let him go. I spent days repeating Jet's remarks in my thoughts until they seemed carved in my bones. "I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I felt like I couldn't say no to you for quite some time. Each time the weight of what I had done got greater, suffocating me for years. I told myself that what we shared was mutual, that I was assisting him, loving him in the way he required, but now all I could see was how much I had harmed him. I wanted to make things right, but every time I went to contact them, I froze. What could I possibly say to alleviate the anguish I'd caused? Every remark felt insufficient, like attempting to repair a shattered dam with a piece of tape. I knew I couldn't simply leave things as they were. Jet needed an apology, but he also wanted to hear me accept responsibility. So I wrote him a letter. "Dear Jet, I don't even know where to start. How can I start apologizing for something I can't even fully articulate to myself? All I know is that I have harmed you in ways I never intended, and for that I really apologize. When your mother died, I promised myself that I would protect you no matter what. I thought I was doing it, but somewhere along the process, I lost sight of what it actually meant. I crossed borders that should never have been crossed, and as a result, I lost something I will never regain, your faith. You stated you couldn't say no to me, which hurt my heart since I never wanted you to feel imprisoned, as if you didn't have a choice. I cannot erase what has already occurred, but I can guarantee you that from now on, I will respect your boundaries. I'll give you the space you need to discover who you are without me hovering over you. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it, but I hope that one day you'll be able to look back on the good times we had and realize that, even though I failed you so many times, I always loved you. Jet, I am very sorry for everything. Love, Aunt Meline." I left the note on his desk one morning while he was out with Bryson. I didn't anticipate an answer straight away, but the wait was terrible. Every time my phone rang, my heart raced, only to plummet when I discovered it wasn't him. Days stretched into weeks and nothing changed. I began to wonder if I had lost him permanently. Then one evening there was a knock on the door. I opened it to see Jet standing there, appearing much older than his 19 years. He held the letter in his fingers, folded and crumpled as if he'd read it 100 times. For a minute, we simply stared at each other, unsure what to say. "Can we speak?" he eventually inquired, his voice low and calm. I nodded and stepped aside to allow him in. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching over us like a chasm. Finally, he broke it. "I've been thinking a lot," he continued, staring down at the letter, "about us, about everything, and I'm not sure if things will ever be the same again." His remarks stung, but I knew they were correct. "I don't expect them to," I added quietly. "I simply want you to know that I'm there for whatever you need, whether it's space, time, or nothing at all. I will respect it." He looked up at me, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I saw a glimpse of the boy I used to know in his eyes. "I am willing to rebuild," he responded, "but it will take time." "That's all I could possibly ask for," I said, my voice breaking slightly. We sat there for a long time, without talking much, simply sharing the space in a timid but hopeful manner. It wasn't a resolution. It was more of a beginning, frail and uncertain but real. I would like to say that's the conclusion of the narrative, but I'm not sure what happens next. I'm still trying to figure out how I got here and how to move ahead. I know I've made awful mistakes, and I'm not sure if they can ever be undone, but I want to try for Jet, for myself, for the opportunity to be better, so I'm turning to you. What do you do if you've hurt someone you love? How do you make atonement for something so terrible? I don't know the answers, but perhaps you do. What would you do if you were ever in a similar scenario, or even if you hadn't? How would you fix it? Please share your ideas in the comments section. I'm here to learn, listen, and grow. And before you leave, if this tale touched you or gave you something to think about, please like this video. It not only lets me know you're here, but it also helps spread the word about this tale to others who may need it. If you think someone in your life may benefit from this conversation, please share this video with them and remember to subscribe. This is not the end of my journey, and I want you to be a part of it as we progress together. Thank you for being here and participating in this topic. Your views and insights mean more than you realize.